The next part of the lecture, we want to talk about the humanist part of how typefaces evolved. And humanist refers to the hand, which refers to calligraphy. So you'll start to see how fonts started to evolve just by taking a look at where they started from and really take a look at how they were structured. And usually this was a system that was practical for designers to look at because it was based on anatomical characteristics of the letter forms. And you have classification categories even within particular humanist fonts. So you see those different kinds of categories of fonts. But for today, because we're talking about the origins of fonts, I'm going to be referring to the humanist fonts, but particularly Blackletter, because Blackletter is very much rooted in calligraphy, and you'll start to see that even within Blackletter, you have different categories within that same theme right here, and you'll see the differences between those four. So humanist typefaces mark the start of the refinement of the typographic form, centuries of handwritten calligraphic letter forms, and they were the basis of typefaces, and then they evolved to more sophisticated types of fonts. And then we take a look at the visual characteristics of a humanist typeface, and we'll see that it is very much based in calligraphy. As you can see, there is a slanted axis in both of those letter forms. So usually you have the broad-nibbed pen. You have one stroke that goes down, and then the top stroke also goes from top to down. Then it forms this vertical axis. You can see it in both letter forms. So it has like a diagonal stress, if you will. And this is based off of the lifting of the pen at a specific angle, and then having to draw the second stroke again, leaving a bit of thinness to the letter form. And then as you go out, you have this thickness and then back thin as you curve in the pen. As you can see with the rest of those letter forms, you have this diagonal stress or weight. And this is what makes a humanist typeface very prevalent, is that particular vertical stress. And usually they're very easy to read. You see lots of novels set in this particular kind of humanist font, and the reason why is because it has an ease on the eye. It goes back to the hand, and it doesn't have a very mechanical look and feel to it. So that's why novels are set in this type of style of font versus something that is, say, a sans serif, which would be very difficult to read, say, something that is over 100 pages in something that is like a Helvetica. This one is a little bit easier on the eyes, so it's more of the preferred font category for novels. So typefaces were extremely calligraphic in their appearance, and they possessed a strong oblique stress. Earlier letter forms were drawn with a broad-nibbed pen, as we can see with Blackletter. And with Blackletter, this is what we know as Blackletter, a very mechanical, particular type of font, sometimes written in German or in Latin. Spacing was not always something that was considered, because what was great about Blackletter is that you can stuff a lot of words and sentences because it's very vertical font. It's basically one stroke, smaller stroke, longer stroke, but it's all very like top to bottom, vertical, up and down, up and down. There's not much variation in this. This is why when we do calligraphic demos, we start with Blackletter. It's actually the easiest calligraphic style to learn. So it's also known as Gothic. It was early forms of blackletter were introduced by Humanist. So you'll see some Bibles written in blackletter. And he was the inventor of movable type, and he set the 42-line Bible. And this is what movable type looks like. You pretty much, this is how newspapers were written and produced. So you set your type, each and every letter form, in a galley, and this is called a type galley, what holds all the typefaces and letter forms together. You set your typeface, so in this case it looks like a Bedoni typeface. You set each and every character, every letter, side by side, and keep in mind this is in reverse, and you have your spaces in between. And then you put your paper on top and you ink, and then you have to remove the paper, and this is how you would create a newspaper or an announcement. A very labor-intensive process back in the day. Manual typefaces and manual labor involved for posters, flyers, anything that involved visual communication. This is what a blackletter Bible looks like. So again, like I said, this particular typeface allows for a lot of words to be used in a column because it is somewhat narrow in nature. So it allows for that ability to stash a lot of words. Not necessarily the easiest to read though. So this is where we start to run into those particular kinds of problems. Like I said, there are 4 different classifications of blackletter. Each and every one of them looks different, yet it is blackletter. And here is how you can see what each of them does look like. So you have textura, bastarda, fraktur, and rotunda. So this is the font called Bastard, and it is a style of blackletter. This is done by Jonathan Barnbrook, who is a British graphic designer who designs a lot of 90s style typefaces, but he's used the history as part of his inspiration. And as you can see with Bastard, there is a specific kind of narrow element to all those fonts and also those letter forms. Very narrow counter space in the A. The T also somewhat narrow with little ticks for the crossbar. So you see with the rest of the font, it's a very narrow font, so it's not usually the easiest to read. I would say it is a decorative font. But he's also done something pretty interesting with the characters of the capitals, where it's a little bit more geometric. So he definitely has his own spin to this character set. So, and this is Bastard, and then the bold is Fat Bastard. So definitely looking at the differences between the two, we see the narrower one here, and then the bolder version here. Definitely having more weight. Again, not easy to read. This is considered a display font used sparingly for titles or little pieces here and there. So the visual characteristics of blackletter we see are characterized by pointed and angular forms, high contrast between thick and thin strokes, as you can see here, high contrast between thin strokes and thick strokes, and then they're modeled after the medieval manuscript lettering with a broad-nibbed pen. It's usually done at a 45-degree angle. Then you have textura. Textura is a little bit more extended, so as you can see it has a little bit more width to it, and it has a little bit more of those flares that come on top of the letter forms. Some of them are decorative and some of them are part of just the linguistics of Latin or German. So that's textura. Then we have bastarda. Bastardo, also a Blackletter font, is a little bit more organic in nature, and you start to see just how fluid it is compared to the previous two examples I've shown. So it's a very versatile category of fonts you'll see here with Blackletter, is it can be pretty geometric in nature, but it can also be fluid and organic and somewhat easier to read, I would say, based on the different variations that we've seen before. Um, and also a very beautiful combination of elegant strokes. And as you can see, there's not much of a straight line. They're more curved in nature versus what you see in textura, which is a little bit more angular. So this one has a little bit more of a fluid-like movement to it. Then you have Fraktur. Fraktur, also similar to Bastarda, the previous example, has this fluid-like nature to it. And I don't know if you kind of see a resemblance here, but you see a lot of graffiti done in this particular style. And the reasoning is that it has this kind of character and attitude to a lot of the letter forms here. It's like wavy lines, a lot of bold strokes. There's definitely some kind of characteristics to how this particular alphabet collection is portrayed. And it's in fact very popular in Europe. I have seen instances of it on the freeway too, like those big black letter forms on areas of the freeway as well as areas in downtown. They're beautiful representations of visual language. So we can see just by looking at those different examples just how versatile this particular kind of category of type is. Different nuances, you see a difference between each and every one of them. And then we get to something which is completely different, which is rotunda. Refers to the name, more round, easier to read, obviously, and it has different characteristics in which how the font construction and the letter form construction appears to be. And sometimes we see this in old children's books in certain areas where they pull out a quote, or it could be something like a poem. So again, very easy to read, a lot wider in the space that it occupies. So also another versatile type of calligraphy here. And then we get into the applications. Like, so where do we see Blackletter out in the world? Here are some areas that we take a look at. So we've obviously seen this in a Bible setting. We also take a look at this in signage. In particular parts of the world, this is a particular brand in which communities would like to preserve a certain historical look and feel. So Blackletter is the go-to. We see this also in with some artist interpretations. This is a Russian artist named Porkas Lampas, who I would say creates those graffiti-like environments. And what's interesting about this is, it's not readable in any way, but you can tell it takes from Blackletter heavily and creating like almost like a seamless pattern and texture of its own. He does this with fashion, does this with walls, it does this with all different kinds of surfaces he can get his hands on. And we also have the famous New York Times in Blackletter, so specific logo types that we're familiar with, done in Blackletter. And most contemporary applications are reserved traditionally for display style typefaces, mostly in religious or political contexts. However, that's been changed throughout the years, and as you can see, like you have literary companies, New York Times and also LA Times, and also other companies who take a look at Blackletter in a more contemporary way and make that their brand. So Next will be the demo with calligraphy, which I will be explaining in my next video.